Well, welcome. We're continuing our study of the end times in chronological order. We're getting near the end here. I'll make a few comments at the finish about what the plans are going forward. Just to remind you, this is a ministry of theofaith. I'm here to encourage and edify and equip you for the ministry that the Lord has given you. That's my goal. Love to hear back from you and see how I'm doing on that ministry. What we're going to do today, though, is go forward as we look at the end times in chronological order. So we've been going through quite a bit. We are near the end. We'll be talking about the Millennial Kingdom today. Specifically, what we'll be covering is a 75-day interval between the end of the Battle of Armageddon and the beginning of the kingdom. And then I'll be looking at a couple of characteristics of that millennial kingdom when it comes. Now, maybe scratching your head, wondering what 75-day interval? Never heard of this. I'm going to explain that to you. Here is our picture of the book of Revelation. Those are the 22 chapters of the book of Revelation. The book pulls together for us revelation that's scattered throughout the Bible and orients it toward the end times. And that's what we see here. So we've gone through several of these events already. We're down at the very end here after Jesus's return, this area that we call the kingdom here. Now, critics of dispensationalism, or the view that I take here, critics would say that, well, you can't really say that there's a millennial kingdom. It's only mentioned one place in the Bible, and we can't really be sure of that. Well, I'd counter that by saying that the millennial kingdom is mentioned throughout the Bible. I put some representative Bible verses there pointing at chapter 20. Only in chapter 20 does it tell us how long the kingdom is. So that is revelation that's left for the end. And in God's progress, or his progressive revelation, he doesn't choose to reveal everything at the beginning, but over time. And that's what we see in the book of Revelation. So we have a kingdom. Chapter 20 tells us the kingdom is 1,000 years, and prior verses in the Bible tell us the character of that kingdom. One of the things I'll point out when we talk about the kingdom specifically is that the kingdom is an intermediate kingdom. That means it's not like things are today, but they're also not as good as they're going to get in the eternal state. So it's a in-between kind of state, an in-between sort of kingdom that we're talking about here. So about that 75-day interval, well, let's calculate this. We have to go back to Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. I'm going to do some interpretation here for you. Again, my purpose in these videos is to give you the big picture, and we can dig into the details later. So what we're going to do is just look at Daniel 9:27 that says, "He, who we understand from later revelation to be the Antichrist, will make a strong covenant with many for 1 week." So this is the beginning of the week of Jacob's trouble, the beginning of the week that we call tribulation. It's actually a week of years. It's 7-year tribulation. And for half the week, he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. So this halfway through that 7 weeks, or after 3.5 years, the Antichrist is going to interrupt the ongoing temple offerings that are happening. So there's going to be a time in the future where these temple offerings will resume. Then it says, "On the wing of abomination shall come one who makes desolate." Jesus actually referred to this in Matthew 24:15, the abomination of desolation being set up in the temple. "Until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator." So what he's saying here is that this last 3.5 weeks is going to last until the end of the desolator, which we understand to be the end of the tribulation, the end of the battle of Armageddon. So he will continue until Jesus pours out judgment on him. So if we do some math here, 3.5 years equals 42 months. A biblical month is 30 days. So that comes out to 1,260 days. So that's the length of time of the last half of the tribulation. So there's where we start. Now later in the prophecy of Daniel, Daniel chapter 12, verses 11 to 12, gives us some more data. It says, from the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished, and Daniel 9:27 told us that happens midway through the tribulation, and the abomination of desolation is set up. So again, it's referring to Daniel 9:27. There will be 1,290 days. So verse 11 just added 30 extra days to the original 1,260 from Daniel 9:27. So we're up to 1,290 days. Then the very next verse says, how blessed is he who keeps waiting and attains to the 1,335 days. So that verse has added another 45 days on it. So if we take the original, the total 1,335 days, subtract it from the 1,290 days, there's 75 days from the end of the tribulation to what I understand to be the start of the kingdom. What's going on? What's happening there? Well, before we get to that, let's just recap here. We start out with 3.5 years, 1,260 days. Add 30 days on top of that, another 45, gets us 75 extra days. What's going on? Most people think that this is most dispensational commentators anyway, think that this is a time of preparation between the end of the Battle of Armageddon and the beginning of the kingdom. So what's going on here? Well, a number of things. We know from Isaiah chapter 2 that there's going to be topographic changes, that is, changes to the surface of the earth. We'll talk about some of these when we get to the discussion of the kingdom. There's also going to be a temple set up. This would be the fourth kingdom, Ezekiel's kingdom, which is not kingdom, but temple. Fourth temple set up. It's spoken about in Ezekiel 40 to 48. We know that the beast and the false prophet are thrown into the lake of fire at the end of Revelation 19, and that Satan is bound and confined to an abyss in Revelation 20 at the beginning. There's a resurrection of the tribulation and the Old Testament saints that's talked about in Isaiah and Daniel and in Revelation as well. Those saints are resurrected. The abomination of desolation is removed from the temple. I'm guessing there's also going to be some cleansing, ritual purifying of the temple at that time. Israel, the remnant of Israel that still is outside the land, will be gathered. And then there's, Jesus talked about the judgment of the nations, first judgment of the Jews that survived the tribulation, spoken about in Ezekiel and Matthew both. And then a judgment of the Gentiles who survived the tribulation. And again, Matthew talks about that, as does the book of Joel. And finally, there's establishment of the kingdom government. So Jesus will be on his throne. We know he promised the apostles to be sitting on thrones, reigning over the 12 tribes of Israel. David will be on a throne as well, as I understand it. And I wonder if Paul, who is the apostle to the Gentiles, will also play a role in this end times millennial government. So that's the Millennial Kingdom, or the 75-day interval, and what's happening there. And we'll move on to the Millennial Kingdom. Again, we're talking about chapter 20 here in Revelation, which is, again, is spoken of in other places in the Bible. We'll talk about two features in that kingdom. One is the Millennial Kingdom, or Millennial Temple, that's set up during the interval. And the second thing is the intermediate nature of this kingdom. So let's talk about the temple first. 4 temples in the Bible. There's Solomon's temple before the exile, and it's spoken of in Kings and Chronicles. It's a temple that David wanted to set up, but the Lord wouldn't allow him. But David collected material for the temple for his son. After the destruction of the temple in 586 BC, there was a 70-year exile. And then after that exile, Israel began to return in accordance with the prophecy of Jeremiah. And another post-exilic temple, that is after the exile, another temple was built by Zerubbabel. You can find an account of that in Ezra 1-6. It's interesting that this temple, Zerubbabel's temple, was in fact the temple that was in Jerusalem when Jesus was born. So what had happened here is this Zerubbabel's temple was expanded by King Herod. A long building process, I believe, if memory serves me right, began in 20 BC, and it extended and continued until just before the collapse or fall of Jerusalem. I think it was completed in about 67 AD. So an 80-year building project, typical government project, to expand that Zerubbabel's temple. We know that there's going to be an Antichrist temple in Jerusalem. It'll be there during the last half of the tribulation for sure. And then this millennial temple that's spoken of in Ezekiel 40-48. This could be a brand new temple, or it could be the Antichrist temple that has been cleansed and purified and expanded quite a bit, as you'll see here in a moment. So that's what we're focused on, is this 4th temple. Here's Ezekiel's temple. This picture of it is from the resource I took it from, calls this the 3rd temple. As I said, I think this is the 4th, but this is Ezekiel's temple. To give you a size comparison, how massive this is. This is an American football field, 100 yards by, I think, 40 yards wide. That's what this is down here. That's the massive size of this temple. It'll be in Jerusalem, in a Jerusalem that's been topographically altered. Here's another picture, kind of a graphic picture of the temple. And again, comparisons with the tabernacle, which is carried in the desert throughout from the Exodus to David's death, essentially. And then here's Solomon's temple, which was erected by Solomon but destroyed in 586. This is Herod's temple. Again, this was the post-exilic or after the exile temple built by Zerubbabel, and then Herod expanded this significantly. But you see that it's still only about 1/3 of the size of the Ezekiel's temple. So it's going to be quite massive. The other feature of this kingdom, the Millennial Kingdom, is its intermediate nature. So we see in this graphic here the fallen world from the Old Testament through the church age, right through the tribulation. That is the fallen world. The eternal state, which begins in Revelation chapter 21, we have this renewed heaven, a new earth, and a new heaven. Some people think that means it's renewed, that is a makeover, a do-over. I think it's a total replacement. My point here, though, is that in between the fallen world and the renewed world, we have this millennial kingdom. It's an intermediate stage between these two. Again, it's better than the fallen world, but not as good as it's going to be in the renewed world. So there's several Bible passages that we could look at that discuss this. I'd encourage you to get your Bible out, possibly pause right here, get your Bible out and follow along with me. In Psalm 72, if you look at Psalm 72, it has features that are both, shows the intermediate nature of this kingdom. So, for example, in verse 8 of Psalm 72, it says that there's going to be a Messiah on the earth ruling from sea to sea. All the kings and all the nations are going to serve him. There's going to be just great abundance of food on the earth. The earth is going to be producing just massive amounts of crops. It's going to be so fertile. And the nations on earth are going to be calling this Messiah blessed. And the whole earth will be filled with his glory. That's the prayer there in Psalm 72. So we see this universal rule, different on the earth, abundance of grain, the nations subservient to the king. But it's not perfect yet. The king is on his throne and he's going to defend the afflicted. So there will still be people who are afflicted on the earth. Looks like they'll get immediate or near immediate judgment and comfort, but they're still there. The same with the needy. There's still the children of the needy that are on the earth that needs saving. I think the context here is salvation in terms of snatching them out of the hands of the oppressor in verse 4, who's going to be crushed when he shows himself to be who he is. It's hard to imagine during the Millennial Kingdom that there'll be continuing rebellion against Jesus, but there will be. Verse 9, he's going to be subduing his enemies and responding to the cries of the helpless for help. So he'll hear from Jerusalem and respond. He'll show compassion to the poor, again showing that, as Jesus said, the poor we will always have with us. So there'll be poor on the earth during this millennial kingdom, and he'll be delivering the oppressed and people who are victimized by others. He's going to intervene. So again, we see the evidence of the intermediate nature, the in-between fallen world and perfect world that this kingdom is going to encompass. In Isaiah 2, I spoke about this earlier, we see significant geographical changes to Jerusalem. Let me read this. It says, "In the last days, the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established as the chief of the mountains, and will be raised up above the hills, and all the nations will stream to it. And many people will come and say, 'Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us.'" And it goes on to say, "The law will go forth from Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he," that is the Messiah, "will judge between the nations." So again, we see these, take this literally, these significant topographical changes that will be happening in Jerusalem, or will have happened, to lift up the Temple Mount. I think it's going to be expanded to accommodate the expanded Ezekiel's temple. Nations will be streaming into Jerusalem. They'll be coming there to learn from the Lord, where there's going to be a temple there. This will be Ezekiel's temple again, I'd say. And that people are going to want to learn his judgments. They're going to want to go and have their cases adjudicated, and he will issue his law. It'll go forth from Zion and Jerusalem, and he'll be judge. He'll be the ultimate judge among the people and nations rendering decisions. So again, we see evidence here that there's going to be the Messiah in Jerusalem, but still a need for making decisions. People will still need to be educated in the will of the Lord. That will still be going on. Isaiah 11 is another text that explains to us what's going to be happening during this intermediate millennial kingdom. Isaiah 11, 1 through 9. Again, I'd say turn with me there or pause the video and look closely for yourself. In verse 1, we see the restoration of the Davidic kingdom. So there shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots will bear fruit. It's talking about the restoration of the Davidic line in the Davidic kingdom. Verses 2 and 3 tell us that he will have this supernatural power to rule, wisdom and understanding, counsel and might, the knowledge and the fear of the Lord will characterize the ruler. In verse 4, we see that with righteousness he will judge the poor. He will decide with equity the meek of the earth. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. So there's going to be this continued presence of the poor and afflicted and wicked who will come under judgment by him. There's going to be a state of Eden-like or Edenic peace between man and animal. We see that in verses 6 through 8, where it talks about the wolf dwelling with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the young goat. The only time that happens today, of course, is if the young goat is inside the leopard. But this will be a time when they'll be side by side. And finally, in verse 9, kind of a universal knowledge of Yahweh. They will not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. So they'll be quite aware of the presence of the Lord in Jerusalem during this time. But nevertheless, they'll still be poor and afflicted and wicked. Later in Isaiah, we see in Isaiah 65, again, elements of the eternal state. There's new heavens and new earth. The former things are being left behind. There's eternal joy. There's no weeping. There's no evil. So we have these beginnings of the eternal state present. But at the same time, we see death continuing in Isaiah 65. It's not been eradicated yet. There's still death in the intermediate kingdom. But life is unusually long. It's been extended very long. Let me turn there to Isaiah 65, verse 20. Says that, finding it now. And he shall bring all your brothers from all the nations as an offering to the Lord on horses and in chariots. Oh, wrong chapter. No wonder it doesn't make sense. Isaiah 65. Verse 20. No more shall there be an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not fill out his days. For the young man shall die 100 years old, and the sinner 100 years old shall be accursed. So again, unusually long lives, but death continues in this intermediate kingdom. So one question that frequently comes up is, if you die during the millennial kingdom, are you immediately resurrected? The truth of the answer is, I don't know. I haven't actually looked into that. Maybe one of you could research that and leave in the comments what you think the Bible teaches on this. So there we have the next steps in the kingdom, or in the end times, is the establishment of the millennial kingdom. It's preceded by a 75-day period and then closes with Jesus' 1,000-year reign. So much more that could be said about this. Again, my purpose here is to give you the big picture, give you the layout of the land, and give you a framework that you can fit the details in. I'll be, once I finish this series, I'll be doing a series on the book of Revelation itself. So it'll be, go through each of the 22 chapters and discuss what's happening there. And we'll fill out the details that we're only touching on as we go through this study. So I pray that this is helping you to put together the puzzle of the end time events. I pray that it's building you up, giving you confidence, trust, assurance in the Lord, and that ultimately you're being equipped to do the work that the Lord has you to do, and that you're out there being diligent in doing it. So God bless you, brothers and sisters. I'd ask you to go down into the, I guess it's over here, go down here, subscribe to the YouTube channel. That would help me out, and you'd get a notification every time I post a new video, make it public. So God bless you, and God bless your reading and study of His Word.